Hey everybody, welcome to the show. I am extremely happy to have another female instructor on because I always get complaints. When will you have another woman on the show? They've got a lot of great female instructors and experts. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do my best. So I did. So here is Kelly Sayre. Hi, Kelly. How are you doing?
Good. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here.
It took a while for us to get together because you are so busy. I am so busy. And so I'm really happy that we managed to find the time. I'm going to dive right in. So for the people watching on YouTube, on Kelly's right shoulder, there's a really interesting book called Sharp Women, and we are going to talk about that a little bit. And then at the end, Kelly and I will keep on talking for the bonus episode over my Patreon, where I got a bunch of really good questions from my patrons. So that's what you guys have to look forward to. Starting off right now, Kelly, how did you get started basically with being interested in situational awareness? Or maybe let's define what you mean with situational awareness first before we go on.
I think that's a great question to start with, because when I do my trainings, I typically start with that exact question. What is situational awareness? And people are like, I don't know. It's often given as a directive to other people that you care about. Hey, you need to be aware of your surroundings. You need to be paying attention. And the other person says back to you, great, what am I looking for? How do I know if I'm watching for the right things? And then if I think I see something, then what do I do? And it becomes very apparent that us as instructors, for example, we've been doing it so much or so long that it's become subconscious. And it's really hard to kind of break down and think back to the foundational skills of how you built your awareness. So the working definition that I go with is situational awareness is using all of your senses and your intuition to understand when something is off in your environment. And then understanding what that means to you and your safety. And then lastly, taking action to preserve your safety. And the reason why I break it down in those specific steps is, again, trying to break down, hey, this is a process, and it happens usually so fast, we don't consciously realize it. And understanding that being aware is not just visual observation. It's not simply using your sight. It's also understanding your hearing works faster than any of your other senses. That noticing something is off in your environment isn't always an immediate threat. It could be a clue that there's something amiss, or something's moved, or something doesn't smell right, something doesn't sound right. So it's simply getting us curious and then understanding, well, what does that mean to our safety? And obviously keeping our safety a priority, taking action to get to safety. And I love that perspective switch as well. Instead of get away from danger or, leave, it's make sure you're not just leaving and putting yourself in a worse position. Make sure your focus is getting to safety. And I break down in my presentations a lot of the individual senses, because even as humans, we have been using these skills for so long outside of personal safety that we forget, the saying, moms have eyes in the back of our heads. No, we don't. We use our sense of hearing. I know when my kids are sneaking a snack out of the cupboard by the sound of the hinges, their footsteps on the floorboards. I can smell when they need a shower, different things. We use our senses, all of our senses, to tell us something is off in our environment. And for any parents, again, I because I work with a lot of moms or women, and women naturally tend to have a caretaker or a nurturer role, even if they don't have their own kids, maybe aunts or, friends as kids, they can sense things a little bit more consciously than males. No offense, guys. My kids come to my side of the bed when they're scared at night or whatever. And 9 times out of 10, I can feel that they're staring at me on my side of the bed, even though I'm in a deep sleep, and it scares the heebie-jeebies out of me. But I can sense that, where my husband, no offense to my husband, he just doesn't. He doesn't have that necessarily. And then intuition, understanding the intuition process is also key to recognizing those signals faster. So when I talk about, these are foundational skills, I like to talk about the sense of taste, because in personal safety, or when we're talking about self-defense, so often we again go into kind of the fear or the what ifs, or I'm scared of the boogeyman in the bushes. And it's like intuition, as Gavin de Becker states in his Gift of Fear book, it has 2 key components. It's always in response to something, and it always has your best interest in mind. So when I talk about taste, I ask individuals, have any of you tasted spoiled milk or food that's expired? Before you can think, something's off, your body's trying to get rid of it. It's already trying to spit it out. It's already trying to, get it out of your body, because as the intuition signal process, it's in response to that, and it has your best interest in mind. It wants to keep you healthy. It doesn't want you to get food poisoning. It doesn't want you to get sick. And so trying to show them, or individuals in my classes or my trainings, this is not only from what society tells us is dangerous, or society says, be aware of your surroundings. We also need to be aware if we're eating something that's going to make us sick. And so really trying to get down to the basics of the foundational skills of situational awareness, I feel gives individuals power. It helps build their self-confidence in, these are already naturally occurring in you already, life skills, life hacks, but you've maybe never looked at them from that personal safety perspective, and realizing things that you do every day to go about your day can also be used in personal safety, in violence prevention, in self-defense that's not physical. And so that's how I came up with my definition of situational awareness, and trying to break it down in ways that anyone can relate to.
No, it makes perfect sense. For me, I see them as being situational awareness and intuition being very much intertwined. Maybe not necessarily 2 sides of the same coin, but definitely there's an interaction. Whereas the way I learned it, situational awareness is like a template that you overlay on reality, and you view reality through that template, like what fits, what doesn't fit, and so on. It's a very basic explanation. And intuition, lately I've started talking about it as looking at it as the totality of your experience and knowledge versus the totality of circumstances that you're in right now. And that everything you've ever experienced, like you said, tasted, known, felt, and so on, that is too much to keep in your head right away. There's just too much information. But your subconscious mind is tracking that stuff. And then there's a totality of circumstances, not necessarily one thing. It could be a bunch of things, or everything is normal, but one thing stands out, or everything is chaos. It's very abnormal. And then one thing is different from all the rest. And your subconscious mind knows something's happening and focuses on that. And like, could be just a feeling, could be a gut feeling, could be you're starting to feel very uneasy, could be a bunch of things. But there's a lot of subconscious stuff going on that you then, I think, rationalize and like, oh, hold on, I'm going to pay attention to this. And then you're like, yeah, this doesn't fit. And a fun story from my childhood is my sisters and I were playing in the courtyard, and we decided to sneak out of the house, which we managed to do by the garage. And we were sneaking in front of the front door underneath the window, all of us, when the door opens and my mom starts yelling at us to get back inside. And we're like, how did she know? We made no sound. Years later, she said, every time it became quiet, I knew you guys were up to something.
It is so true.
And that's intuition in a very, easy to understand example, is that everything is the same. You're going about your day. Not all of a sudden, I can't hear the kids anymore. Okay, gotta go check. Every parent knows this. And that brings it back to what you were saying about there's a lot of stuff we already use. You just have to look into the filter of, self-protection, self-defense, and so on, and safety, as opposed to making sure the kids, don't burn their hand on the stove, making sure the food doesn't boil over, making sure you don't crash into the car in front of you when you see two cars in front of him, the brake lights go on, and all this stuff we already do. Just expanding your definition of it a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I completely and 100% agree. And I love that example that you use when it gets quiet, something's up. It's not always going to be a loud or an obvious sound. Sometimes it's when there's no sound.
Exactly. Before we get to the book, I would just want to ask, what is the Diamond Arrow Group? So you could expand a little bit on that before we start digging into the book.
Yes, I realize, and I think it's cool, but I realize that a lot of people wonder about why I call it the Diamond Arrow Group.
I love the name.
Me too.
So
I love quotes. I'm a big person on quotes. You can see the picture behind me. I'm big on kind of sayings. And years ago, I had read a quote that said, this is not verbatim, but something to the effect of, an arrow can only be shot forward by being pulled back. So when life is pulling you back with difficulties, just keep aiming. It's about to launch you into something great. And I loved that perspective shift on facing life's challenges, because all of us have faced some sort of challenge at some point in our life that we had to overcome. And when you're in it, or when you're dealing with it, when you're in the thick of that challenge, it can get overwhelming. And it's easy to think of, oh, fine, I'll just quit, or I'll give up, whatever it is. And so I liked that shift of just keep going, keep aiming, you'll get through this. So when I was starting my company, I wanted an arrow incorporated somehow. And I looked up the symbolism and different meanings of arrows, and I came across an arrow through a diamond signifies courage or confidence moving forward. And a solitary arrow means protection from harm. So I thought that's perfect, because the mission of what I do and the mission of my work is to help any individual, but especially women, have the confidence to live life on their own terms, because it's a great, big, wide, wonderful world out there. And some of the coolest things I've ever gotten to do was through or by meeting strangers that I connected with and built a relationship with. And so I didn't want, it broke my heart when I would hear women say, well, I don't want to travel, or I don't like meeting new people because I'm scared of them. And I'm like, oh, there's again, another visual or another saying is, here's your comfort zone, and all the really cool shit happens outside of your comfort zone. And so if we don't ever learn to face some of those fears and overcome them, to me, you're not living life to the fullest. So that diamond arrow name or symbol really represents like, hey, we're gonna overcome this fear of something bad happening, because I'm going to give you the tools. We're going to help you figure out how to build your self-confidence, because self-defense is not prescriptive. I could sit here and tell you, hey, this is how you need to live your life. You need to do X, Y, and Z. And then if you're out living life and you see, letter Q, and you're like, well, Kelly didn't tell me what to do, because you haven't built your own skills. Because as self-defense instructors, we're not going to be there when our students are faced with some sort of a micro threat or a big threat. So they have to build the skills to be reliant on themselves.
Oh, okay, excellent. What are all the activities of the Diamond Arrow Group?
What are all the what?
All the activities. So, of course, your courses, but what else do you do?
I do the keynote speaking, which kind of lends more to the motivational, because it's reminding individuals, you have all these skills already. I'm not asking you to take years of specific classes of some sort of a physical self-defense, mastery program. You have these skills. You can take what I'm teaching you right now and start using them immediately. It's not like you're going to all of a sudden turn into some master situational awareness guru, because in my opinion, there's no such thing as perfect situational awareness, but it's a mindset. You have to cultivate that mindset. You have to implement daily habits, and you have to continue to practice and to continue to learn, because going back to kind of how impactful ourselves are, or how we view the world, or experiences we've had, you have to get curious about yourself and start to question, well, why am I scared of that? Why does that thing in my environment cause me to get some anxiety, or cause me to start worrying about something that might happen? Where does that come from? So I really love getting up on stage and giving these aha moments to people. And then I do breakout sessions at conferences, really getting into nitty gritty that's specific to whoever the audience is, whatever, maybe it's a career or related to their job, or a personal conference focus. And then the trainings one-on-one, I don't get to do that as often because I've been really busy. But I love coaching women individually and helping them one-on-one, because maybe they've experienced something and they don't want it to happen again, or they have fears that it's going to happen again, and they still don't feel like they know what they would do if they found themselves in a situation again. And the book sales, helping get that out there so that anyone can start learning the information. It's not that you have to have me there in person. So,
Okay.
And then of course I do talk about self-defense tools and different options, because again, there's things from a woman's perspective that a lot of times a male might not think of, because he doesn't typically have gel nails or fake nails. So if you've got really long nails, it might be hard to operate this tool efficiently. Or, hey, you want to carry a knife or some sort of stabby tool. Okay, well, then that means that person is going to be really close and in your space. So you have to be comfortable in that scenario. If you're truly going to carry it, you have to mentally be there and understand that it's not a distance tool. That's a close-up and personal tool. And as we know, 75 to 90%, depending on the study you read, the violence against women comes from someone we know. So you can have all the tools in the world, but if it's the creepy coworker, or the, creepy family member, or your loved one, somebody you're in a relationship with, are you going to actually feel comfortable deploying that tool on them? So there's lots of things that I like to bring up, because people go, oh, well, that's cool. That looks awesome. Or everyone's, this is the new hot thing. And it's like, okay, let's talk it through. So then what are you going to do with it? And then after you deploy it, or, hey, I've got this personal alarm. Awesome. Once you push the button on the personal alarm, what's your plan? So being able to talk through and help them find the answers, and help them realize, like, oh, I didn't think about that. I didn't really think about what I would do if I pushed the alarm and then nobody came to help me. So there's a lot of different factors that it's really hard for companies to put out in marketing. And so in my opinion, think it's up to us as instructors to talk through some of those things and really help educate that there's not just one solution and then the problem is solved. There's lots of steps and lots of things to consider.
All right. I'm in total agreement there. I wish more people would understand that violence is complicated and there's no easy answers, there's no quick fixes, and there's usually a lot of work involved if you want whatever you're doing to be effective, of course.
Right.
If you just want to have like a talisman or some sort of thing that you put all your hope in, well, yeah, that's fine, but success rate tends to be low on those things. Right, let's get into the book. So, Sharp Women, Embrace Your Intuition, Build Your Situational Awareness, and Live Life Unafraid. What gave you the idea to write the book?
Well, and this might surprise people since I have published a book, but I actually don't like to write. I would much rather talk. I would much rather have conversations, but the silver lining of the pandemic, I couldn't get out and talk. I couldn't get out and share my knowledge very easily. And so many people were online all day long that the last thing they wanted to do was at night, sit down in front of a computer screen again and talk about personal safety. There was already enough things in their worlds that was scaring them, that was uncertain, that it was like too much. And so I was at a point where I was frustrated and I kind of gave the universe an ultimatum, like, okay, one more thing. And if it doesn't happen, or if it does happen, I'm going to write a book. Well, here we are. And the universe laughed at my face. And I started the process of writing the book. And I actually had written the first manuscript and on my own, and was just like, here's everything really jumbled coming out of my head, because I wrote like I was talking, which doesn't equate very well for anyone else who wants to read it. And put it on the back burner for a while because editing, grammar is not a strong suit for me. Again, why I don't really care for writing. And a friend of mine introduced me to a company called Niche Pressworks that walks alongside you as an author and helps you self-publish. So they're considered a hybrid publisher.
Yeah.
And I said, yep, I still feel really passionate that this is what needs to be written, because it's a book I wanted to find when I started my journey, and I couldn't find one, especially written by a woman. And so I went ahead, we actually scrapped the original manuscript and I started over using their processes. And here we are. And Sharp Women came out in February of 2022. And it's been getting really great reviews from men, from the everyday woman, from self-defense instructors, from people who have lots of knowledge and expertise. So it's really been, I've just been totally floored and completely humbled by the great reviews that it's been getting. And it makes me excited because I really hope this gets in the hands of every female. I know that's kind of a big goal, but it's available through Amazon. So because of that, it is accessible in so many places that me trying to get out and hand to people or sell to people or physically get into people's hands, it wouldn't be reaching the masses that I would want it to.
Well, I read it and I liked it a lot. For me as an instructor, I really liked all the different topics that you preach in all the chapters. Mm-hmm. But mostly, I understand why you also get a lot of positive feedback from men, because it is more written, I would say, in the style of a woman, or like women talk to women, as opposed to how a man tends to talk to other guys or to women. Like there's automatic small changes that happen and so on. For instance, what I really enjoyed is a lot of the tone is very conversational. And you say that you don't like writing, you prefer to talk. And I think that shines through in the book. Don't know if it's you or the editor, but that really shines through. It's very easy to read is what I mean. It's not dry material. It's not like, look at me, how smart I am. But it's just like you get taken along for the whole story. And there are many stories in there of examples from your own life, from other people's life. And you don't shy from, the bad stuff, from the negative stuff. You just share it like it is. And I think that's, like we were talking about before we started recording, like being authentic is important, especially when you talk about these kind of subjects, because people can feel it. But somebody who's not authentic, it just, there's no way to hide it, I think, or at least maybe if you're a psychopath. But even then, I'm not saying you are, Kelly.
I don't think
Nor
you
am
are. Well,
I.
and what is it like only 3% or some really small percentage of
Yeah,
the entire world population is actually a
yeah.
psychopath. So
We're good. We're good.
yeah,
Statistically speaking, we should be fine.
we should
Um,
be fine.
but what I meant is that it's very easy to read for women who are, if that's their first exposure to basically the world of self-protection, self-defense, and so on. It's a very, very good way of stepping into that work without getting scared off, which is what a lot of instructors, and that's what I meant, like guys writing for guys, they most likely would write that book differently, and it will scare off women, in my opinion. And it includes a lot of the stuff that I've written. I'm sure that a lot of women are like, I've actually had, like in my Touch One class, because we part of the art is self-defense. I've had, a lady come in, and then we sort of like, what does this mean? All this fancy waving around with the arms. Well, somebody punches you. This is what you do. I'm like, oh, no, I couldn't do that. She walked out of my class, never saw her again.
Yeah.
So I think my male instructors sometimes forget that when they teach, that everybody comes to your class, especially in general, but especially women, if they're looking for self-defense, there's a chance that they might have experienced something bad. I would say that the chance is, more than average high.
Yeah.
So maybe in the writing, when you're specifically aiming for women, I think your approach to writing was really excellent. A lot of, like I said, the easygoing style, but also a lot of examples. I'm like, okay, this is how it relates to your life. And a lot of stuff that I'm sure, I have 4 sisters, so I have a little bit more of experience growing up, and then
More perspective.
maybe a little bit different than most guys. So I don't know, but I mean, it's just a really good, well-written book that I think, I agree with you, especially a lot of young women should read that before you go out into the world and get into long-term relationships, go to work, and so on. I think maybe teenage years is a little bit too early for a lot of this stuff, that it might be like they're not open to it yet, but just start getting into it. There's a few things that I really like that I wanted to get your feedback on, and there's one example basically when you're talking about the way that what would be the best way to put it? The way that society basically teaches women how you grow up and so on. For instance, you talk about mixed messages. Mm-hmm. So young children are told no one has permission to touch you when you don't want to be touched, and yet in the next breath give grandma a hug because she wants one. Right. So could you talk a little bit more about this concept of mixed messages as it relates to self-defense, situational awareness for women, and so on?
Yeah, specifically focusing on the mixed messages that not only kids in general, but a lot of women get is, and that what you brought up is a great point. No one's allowed to touch you if you don't want to be touched, but hug grandma, which to us as adults, we're like, well, this is grandma, and most of the time she's not a threat. Yeah. But what it teaches kids is, no, an authority figure is saying, it doesn't matter how you feel, you need to go give grandma a hug. And we don't necessarily see the impact of that right away because it seems so minuscule. But the messaging, the underlying messaging is what's impactful. And again, as parents, like I said, I have 2 of my own sons, and I have to be very conscious of the messaging I'm giving them about boundaries, because I want them to respect boundaries of others, right? There's a lot of debate out there is, we shouldn't just be teaching our girls how to defend themselves. We also need to teach boys how to be respectful, or boys how to teach boundaries. And I agree, yes. And then it goes back to, okay, well, what kind of behaviors are you modeling for your kids, for your boys? I use this example because pizza is not life or death, as we know. I mean, unless you're really hungry, don't get in the way of me and my pizza if I'm hungry. But my then 8-year-old son was eating his pizza, and I was like, oh, I got done eating my healthy meal, and I was like, I really want a piece of pizza. And I looked at him and I just said, hey, bud, can I have a piece of your pizza? And he looked at me and he was like, Mom, I love you, but no. And I was like, in that moment, I was like, I'm your mother. I paid for that pizza. Your father and I paid for that pizza and the electricity to, cook it in the oven, whatever. But I had a kind of aha moment of that's his boundary.
Yeah.
I don't need to eat that piece of pizza. So right now I can say, okay, so I was like, okay, no problem. And then my husband tested him and said, can I have a piece? And he was like, nope, you neither, Dad. and I tell that because people can laugh and it's lighthearted, but it's that modeling behavior is, as kids, a lot of times we got in trouble if we defied an authority figure's directive, if we defied the rules, if we tried to establish our own boundaries that made an authority figure uncomfortable. Okay, that makes sense. We're authority figures. Again, there is perspective. You're parenting, you're trying to keep them safe, whatever. But in the future, then, what if that same messaging and you apply it to a work situation and there's an employee and a boss situation, and the employee is trying to state a boundary about physical, mental, emotional, and that boss authority is like, nope, doesn't matter. And you just have to do it anyway. Again, perspective. Okay, I don't want to work on Fridays because I'm tired, I'm bored, and it's gorgeous out. Okay, no, you still need to get your job done. Obviously, I'm not saying you can't accept responsibilities, but when it comes to, hey, fetch me my coffee or bring that into my office, or constantly like bringing you in, that boss to the employee and making that employee uncomfortable because they're getting too close physically, or they're asking too many personal questions, or whatever it may be, that's where that struggling to set boundaries with an authority figure can show up in our adult lives that we don't know how to handle because we weren't given the skills or taught when it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate. And again, as kids, we can't have these big, adult conversations. So it's so important to look at what are the things that I can teach my kids that right now is not life or death, but show them how to communicate boundaries, give them the skills to verbalize their wants or needs. And another example, and I can't remember if I put it in the book or not, is having my kids who are now 9 and 10, when we go to a restaurant or when we go somewhere where they need to place an order. And so they need to go to that cash register, that employee, and say, I'd like a burger and fries. Okay, you guys can do it because you need to be able to talk to a stranger. Again, there's another don't talk to strangers. Well, actually, the world is entirely filled with strangers. So we do need to teach our kids how to communicate with a stranger, but they can order their own food. And that way, if that person taking the order didn't get it right, didn't hear them correctly, that then they, repeat back, oh, you wanted chicken nuggets and fries? No, actually, I wanted burgers and fries. Being able to communicate to make sure that it's effective communication. Another example of a non-life-threatening situation, but it's a skill building practice that, I know there's debate. People sometimes say, yeah, your book is what book or what age appropriate level would you consider your book? And I'm like, again, depends. Yeah. It's up to the parents, but here's some things to think about. And I have the chapter in there about situational awareness with kids. How can we start building these skills when they're young? That's not fear mongering. That's not scary. That helps us realize, oh, these are life skills that can be applied in other instances later. And so now my kids have absolutely no problem saying their own order when they're at a restaurant. Okay, buddy, what do you want? Okay, you want that? And then the server comes over and they can give their own order. Okay, now they know how to communicate effectively with a stranger, with someone who might appear to be an authoritative figure to them.
Oh, I agree. When my kids were younger, obviously, as a parent, one of the things you try to do is teach them good manners, which is a little bit different depending on where you live. But for instance, over here, when in the social context you meet somebody, even if they're strangers, you shake hands. That's typical. And if it's friends or family and so on, or or a mixed gathering, you tend to give a kiss on the cheek. That's totally normal here. I told my kids, you do not have to give anybody a kiss on the cheek if you don't want to, but you will have to shake hands. That's the polite thing to do over here, which was my way of trying to communicate with them that, there you have authority over your boundaries. And we do know that, predators aiming their evil deeds at young children will try to groom them and push those boundaries bit by bit. So I wanted to give them, with this example, the chance that you get a choice. You will have to do certain things with strangers that, that's kind of the way life works. But there are boundaries still in effect, and you get to decide.
Yeah.
And just because you don't want to hug somebody doesn't mean that you're impolite, and they can't make you feel impolite. You just shake hands, put out your hand, and you're fine. And they did multiple times that, I could see them switch between the both of these actions. When they felt comfortable, they gave a kiss on the cheek, even strangers that were not being creepy, that were just being chill with children, that were good with kids and so on. And when they felt comfortable, it was good. And when it was like, not necessarily creepy people, because then my radar would start pinging.
Right.
They were just fine shaking hands. And knock on wood, to date, they both have still excellent manners, and they really don't take much crap from other people.
And that's awesome. I mean, I love that example of saying, hey, yeah, there is a line that's age appropriate, that's culturally appropriate, that our family is comfortable backing. Because that's another thing too, is do your kids understand where that line is, and that, okay, this is my line, you have to shake hands, but you don't have to do anything else. And I will back you up no matter who it is. If you drew a boundary, I'll back you up. That also builds their confidence that as kids, okay, I do have that. So when they go out into the world and you can't be with them all the time, they'll still maybe have that voice in their head of like, no, I don't have to just to please you, because I know that I have confidence in my abilities. I have confidence that the influential people in my life when I was growing up, my parents, were very supportive of me and my boundaries. So that's huge as well.
And another example from the book that kind of flows into this here, what we just talked about, is that a lot of times when you have these situations where you're like, feel that your boundaries are maybe being tested and you don't know what to do, and then afterwards you kick yourself like, I should have said this, I should have done that. I really, really liked what you wrote about mental pre-conversation, which is an excellent tool to develop that skill. Could you talk a little bit about mental pre-conversation?
Sure. A lot of times in martial arts or some of the physical self-defense classes, they'll say, or I've heard, your body can't go where your mind hasn't. So that's why it's important to move your body, to play, to test things out. And the same goes for our verbal communication, because if we're trying to prevent getting in a physical self-defense, you have to be able to verbalize what you want, don't want. And a lot of times people think, oh, if somebody said that to me, or if I saw this, I would just tell them off. I would tell them to back up, whatever it was. But then the situation comes and we're like, I don't know what to say. And realizing that boundaries are going to be different, you might be expecting, okay, if a stranger walked up to me and got in my space, I could say something and tell them to back up. But what if it's that coworker? What if it's that family member? Well, I have to see them tomorrow. I give myself an A+ with enforcing boundaries with strangers, because I don't care. I don't care. I'm never going to see you again. Or if I see you again, it's on you. Like, I have no qualms. When it comes to friends, families, acquaintances, somebody I've had some sort of interaction with or will be seeing again in the future, then it gets a little bit mushy, gets a little bit more of a gray area, which can also depend on my mood. Like, am I in a mood to be, confrontational right now? Or I just go away, or I'm just going to walk away. So practicing verbalizing and understanding that being direct isn't rude. And a lot of times, and I talk about that when it talks about the social constructs or the social mores that are more likely to be told to girls, is be nice, be kind. Don't make anyone uncomfortable. I mean, trying not to go off on too much of a squirrel moment here, but the anti-bullying message, in my opinion, sometimes it goes too far. Because what are we saying? You got to be friends with everyone. Be nice to people, include people, don't hurt people's feelings. Yes, I agree. Totally agree. Get that. And at some point, you have to help them differentiate when it's okay not to be friends with everyone, to be able to verbalize, I don't want to play right now, or I don't want to hang out with you, because that does come up later. Again, that impact of those skills later in life when it matters most, when their personal safety is in jeopardy. And so I say this, and you probably have never done this, or you've never experienced this. But for me, I said, how many of you have ever had a pre-conversation with your partner, with your spouse, because you know that you're going to have an argument, or you're going to bring up something, and then so you're like thinking about everything you're going to say and what their comebacks are going to be, so that you have a witty comeback. And that's more in jest, but you've also done it when maybe you're going in for a promotional interview. You have the conversation. What am I going to say? How am I going to show that this promotion is something that I'm completely capable of? We have these conversations in our head all the time, because then what it does is it builds our confidence that when we walk in to have the conversation, we'll be able to get our point across clearly and concisely. And it gives us confidence. We're not walking in like, we may still be walking in with a little bit of nerves, but it gives us more confidence. Well, the same skill can be applied to personal safety. If someone's making you uncomfortable, if someone's teasing you, and now it's starting to not feel so much like teasing, more of being like mean, how do we say that? Somebody says, makes a comment or a joke that makes us uncomfortable, or feels like it's kind of a backhanded, compliment to us. How do we deal with that? And it doesn't always have to be the no, get back. What works for me is sarcasm and humor. So I may try to use a little sarcasm, or I may use some of that humor to kind of test. Are you doing that with intention? Are you trying to offend me? Are you trying to get in my space? Or are you just not reading social cues? And, maybe you think you're hilarious and that joke is hilarious. Well, I don't find it funny. So if I say something to you that kind of like says, hey, I don't think that joke's very funny, maybe you picked the wrong crowd, and how you respond tells me more about your intention, and then gives me that next step. Okay, what do I need to say next? But if I've practiced that ahead of time, I have more confidence knowing that I'll be able to handle myself in that situation. Again, that's not physical. So it's that mental strategy skill that I think is really important when we talk about violence prevention, situational awareness, recognizing behaviors with ill intentions. It comes down to a lot of that verbal communication from you on where your boundaries are.
The reason why I think it's so important is that the vast majority of incidents that have to do with violence can be avoided. It's as simple as not being there, as staying away from certain places at certain times where violence is likely to happen, or at the very least problems tend to rise. But also just walking away, crossing the streets. I just had that a few weeks ago when I was in a small city here, and I'm turning the corner to walk on the other side of the block, and this guy crosses the zebra crossing, and he looks like he's gonna walk past me, and as I turn 90 degrees, I always check anyway, and what do you know, he'd done a sharp 90-degree to get right behind me. Like, okay, fine, I'm just crossing the street. I have to do that anyway because the place I need to go was just up ahead. And then I could hear his pace changing, where he figured out, like, what do I do now? He seems to be aware. And anybody watching it that didn't see anything, But it's just that, well, I have rehearsed that before and I have been there before. So it's not new information or new skill to develop. It's just that you you turn a corner, you just look back for a second and nothing's there. Fine, you didn't lose anything, not paranoid, but now something was there. And I just took immediate action and it was over. And he just kept on walking. I went into the place I need to go and we were done. So having these rehearsals, whether it's like you said, these conversational, I don't know, ripostes that you have at the ready if need be, or this way of immediately seeing like, hold on, there's something going on here. Like you said, let me poke at this a little bit, see what if it's real, is it really what I think it is, or is the guy being a dick, or is he just not aware of
Right.
what a dick he actually is, which can happen. But the same applies to pretty much, I think, any skill that has to do with self-defense. It's just practice.
Yeah.
Even in your own head, just practice. What would I do? I tell this to my students all the time. On my Patreon, I do every month a violence analysis video, some CCTV footage or cell phone footage of an actual event. Like, this is what happened. You can see that there's signs here of the trouble that is brewing. Watch this, what's that? And my message is always like, what would you do? With you see how it ends when this is what you do. Okay, what would you do that would be different, and so on. And I think these kind of lessons are so important and so valuable and so easy to do because, like you said, no violence.
Well, and I think your example of sounds like you were potentially being followed.
Yeah,
so you did physical actions well, let me see if he is following me. Oh, okay. Was I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, it felt like a setup for a robbery. It's like the way we just crossed as I turned right, and the way he crossed me was like he's going to keep on walking. So you can tell by the way that somebody is walking. Like, if he were to go the same way as I did, he would have actually had the chance to do that beforehand. But it looks like he was pretending to walk, or maybe he changed his mind. We'll never know. But it just was too fast.
It doesn't matter as long as your safety is the priority.
Exactly. I don't care. He can think whatever he wants that I cross the street. I don't care. It was too fast. He was too close all of a sudden. Plenty of time still, but too close for my taste. And just like we talked about intuition, it's very rare when you're walking down the street that people suddenly change directions. It happens. I've had it. You've had that. Like, oh no, I have to be over there. You stop and turn around. That's normal. But the standard is mostly that this doesn't happen. People tend to keep on walking in the direction that they need to go, and they know where they're going, or at the very least have a general direction. So rapid changes of direction are something that should ping your radar without panicking. I'm like, you ping my radar and you're getting too close for my comfort, and I have to cross the street anyway. I'm just going to do that right now instead of a few yards down the street. Solved it.
Well, in that the example that I give in the book, because a lot of times women are concerned they're being followed.
Yeah.
And I talk about that predatory mindset. If you're, a hunter, or someone who's a hunter, if you're out hunting, you're not going to, as soon as you see whatever you're hunting, your prey, you don't take the first shot right away. You wait, you watch, you kind of follow their movements. Like, that's understanding that's a natural predator habit. So if someone's following you and you're starting to feel like, I don't know if they're following me, or maybe they're going the same direction, whatever. But if you turn around and you can verbalize, like, are you following me? Or can I help you with something? A lot of times, if there's no ill intent, they'll just be like, what? No, sorry, I'm going the same way, or I parked next to you, or I was going, I went the wrong direction and I had to turn around and go back, or I passed my destination. But if someone does have ill intent, the last thing they want you to do is be aware of them, to be alert, to be present, because then they've lost their moment to surprise you, to catch you off guard. And so simply saying something verbally that, again, you're comfortable with, that you're not trying to be confrontational necessarily, because a lot of times women don't like to be confrontational. We don't want to be seen as rude or judgmental. We want to be kind. And so, I say, okay, just think about it. Like, you could say it in the tone of, oh, can I help you with something? Like, are you lost? Because if there's no intent, no harm, no foul. But if there is ill intent, now they know you're onto them. And being aware that, okay, now I'm in a public place. I'm in a city street where there's lots of shops and pedestrians and just other people around me. It's best to say it now, because if I'm walking to a more residential area, if I'm walking to more like a darker area or a darker side of the street, you don't want to wait till then. Do it now. So having that in your head of, well, yeah, I'll just turn around and say something. I get that not everyone's going to feel comfortable even saying something. Okay, so then what's your plan? Is that where I've seen it shared on social media where, women will say to other women, if you feel like you're being followed, give me a hug and say, oh, I haven't seen you forever. It's so good to see you because I got you, girl, and it's sad that as women, if a woman comes up to us and acts like we know her, we're going to automatically know something's up and there's a threat or she feels threatened, and we're going to bring her into the circle and help protect her. Like, it's just a known thing. But it's one of the, okay, what would you say then to that person? So you see a group of women, you think someone's following you. Hey, ladies, nice to see you. What would you say? Because you don't want to just walk up and be like, hi. That building that mental conversation, it can help you in a lot of different ways. Yeah. And so often in dating situations where it's new and they say something you're uncomfortable with, or like I said, your new employer and there's a coworker, like being able to call it out right away and say something before the threats escalate, when they're doing kind of the micro tests, I call them micro threats to your safety, is at the opening chapter of my book. It's a very intense situation. Don't want to give it away, but it's an intense situation. And speaking with that survivor, with that very strong woman, she was embarrassed to tell anyone, because how did this get to this point? How did I find myself in this situation? Well, it was little things, micro threats to her boundaries that she didn't verbalize. If she would have verbalized way back when, he might have realized, okay, this is not a person I'm going to target. So yes, mental plans physically, like what would you do in a situation physically to defend yourself? Very important to walk through and visualize. But equally as important in the prevention is that mental verbalization strategy building.
Yep. The reason why I bring up the examples from watching CCTV and so on is that in many regards, we live in a very safe society, but that doesn't mean that nothing happens. Obviously, there's more than enough crime and violence happening. Yeah. But in many regards, compared to the overall arc of human history, it's pretty okay. It's pretty good. Like a couple of centuries ago, it was really bad. It was a lot worse. But
even a couple decades ago, if you look at statistics,
I was trying to be kind, but the thing is that means that people lose certain skill sets that were assumed to just be there, because like the example I often give is that a few hundred years ago, it was very normal for a gentleman to be able to fight with his bare hands, with a cane, with even a sword sometimes. That was not unheard of. That was like, well, that's one of the skills you have to have. Otherwise, you're not a man. And whereas now they look at you like, what? You do what with a cane? So this idea of that safety is something that it's much more present now than it used to be, means that a lot of people, men, women, have lost a lot of skill sets that maybe their parents or grandparents actually had, because they were not needed as much anymore. I think in that regard, like just you see something happening on the news, on the internet, whatever, something to do with violence, real, not a reenactment, not a scenario. This is real. It opens people's eyes to that. Actually, this is what violence looks like. Not on TV, not in the movies. It can be just like this, and there's a wide variety of what can happen. Stuff that looks really impressive I've seen people do jump spinning back kicks and knock guys out in the street. And I've seen people get hit once, fall down, crack the back of their skull and die. And anything in between, and much more gruesome as well. And to help people open their eyes to these realities of violence, if we can, like a lot of the examples you give in your book, if you start with just thinking about rehearse the conversation before, like you said, you go to ask for a raise, or there's this guy who's a little bit creepy at work, and okay, it's the first time you meet him, it's like, that's a little bit off here. Give yourself some time to think about, what will I do if he says, and then go through a few scenarios. And just doing that alone tends to give, like you say, confidence, because you've at the very least, you're not just out in the cold there, like, well, I don't know what to do now.
Right. And then realizing you could be verbalizing your boundaries perfectly, and they could not care and not adhere to your boundaries or not respect your boundaries. Okay, well then what? What action do you need to take to preserve your safety? Is there a reporting protocol? Okay, you try, there's steps that you can take next.
Yeah.
Because so often what I hear from law enforcement or threat assessment managers or corporate security, the teams that are tasked with keeping our workplaces safe, is someone will come to them and say, well, this has been going on for 6 months, or, I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to get someone in trouble. And now it's like, oh, you didn't know how to communicate. Hey, this made me uncomfortable. Maybe the articulation. You can't just go up to law enforcement and say, well, this guy's creeping me out. Well, what does that mean? Yeah. Because what creeps me out might not creep you out, or what creeps you out might not creep me out. And so you have to be able to articulate behaviors. You have to be able to verbalize and give accurate information. And again, a lot of times what stops people is, even when describing people, well, how would you describe that person? And they don't know how to articulate, because all of a sudden they're like, well, I don't want to see judgmental. I don't want to seem racist. I don't want to seem sexist. I don't want to seem ageist. Any of those icky labels that we just don't want associated with us. Okay, that can stop you then from being able to, verbalize in a way that can help you, that can improve or keep you safe. And so I can't stress enough the importance of practicing verbalization and giving permission for especially women to be direct. Yep. Being direct is not rude. Be direct. And if they don't respond to that, or if they make fun of that or whatever, that's on them. That's not on you. That doesn't mean you should now let them run over your boundaries. Yep. That just means that they're upset that you set a boundary, which further enforces that boundary needed to be set.
Yeah. When I teach female self-defense courses, then one of the things I always try to talk about is the difference between being assertive and aggressive. Yep. You have every right to be assertive, which is you defend your boundary. Being aggressive is that you cross his boundaries.
Yeah,
you
I like
attack
that.
him. And then I've seen a lot of women then, okay, I get what you mean. Like, I can stand up for myself. I just don't have to attack the guy. There's an example of my blog post is that I wrote that years ago. It's called, how to make absolutely sure to get your ass kicked. A lot of people got upset about it, but it happened in France, and it's this girl in a bikini, and I think in the south of France. She's clearly drunk, and there's this stuff with some of the locals. And anyway, she starts cussing him at the guy a little bit, and he has a lot of choice words as well. And he kind of backs off, and she goes away. And then she comes back to him and starts, engaging him some more verbally. And then she says, yeah, you know what? Yeah, I am a bitch. And she throws her glass in his face, the water or whatever, the drink. And then he walks over and leg kicks her and sweeps her off her feet, and she hits the floor. I'm like, he's an asshole. But you made sure that you got your ass kicked, because he was walking away, you were walking away. It was over. You went back to start again, and then you threw your drink in his face. He's still an asshole, but yep. You were not assertive.
You engaged.
You were aggressive. And then we get people falling, playing semantics. Yeah, but you didn't actually hit him, and it's just a drink. Like, missing the point. The point. So,
Yep.
and I think that's a
Ego
big
gets in the
thing.
way a lot of times. We don't see that on female to male. Like it's very rare that you would see a female being aggressive with a male because they just have more fear of the physical repercussions. But in that case, she threw a drink almost to the fact of like, I'm going to play with that line. I'm going to test that because society says you don't hit a woman. And so she was banking on that. And kind of looking and not taking responsibility for her actions. And that's another thing that I'm a big proponent of is you have your personal responsibility to keep yourself safe. And that's your actions and your behavior are your responsibility. That's all you can control. So you can't de-escalate someone else if you're not de-escalated yourself first. You have to stay calm, and ego is a big thing. Female on female fights, that's where it's very similar to me when I see like the social violence or like the very kind of like, oh, I'm a bigger man than you, and two guys are fighting. Well, that you can see that in female fights. We don't see as much video or CCTV capture of that. But I know people who've worked in prison systems, and they almost say the women's prison fights are worse than the guy fights. Like, women are grabbing hair and ripping hair out of the head and all these things. Is there's violence is still ego driven. It's still, and there's all the different terms, and depending, like if you follow Rory Miller's work or whatever, but it's just realizing like, and to your point about people not having the skills anymore because they got, I don't know how to say lax or lazy, but to your point of earlier generations had to have those skills. So they built them up, they used them for safety, for, to be able to live. And then it became so second nature that once they created the safe environment for their children, the next generation, they forgot the importance of teaching those skills. And in society today, and maybe this will ruffle feathers, I don't know, but in society today, it's frowned upon to learn violence. It's looked at as like, oh, you study violence, or you're okay, or you're an evil person. And it's like, that's not how I view it. I view it as, and now I'm forgetting who said it, but it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. It's the most violent men, humans, understand how awful and horrible true violence is. So they tend to be most peaceful, or to do everything to not get to that violence point. And so that's where I think society has twisted that now, and where you see a lot of the conversations on toxicity in men or even toxicity in women is, I'm like, you're twisting it. Like, understanding and respecting violence is one thing. To me, it's the insecurities, the ego-driven, the prideful people that then think that, oh, I can use this to show what a big man I am or a big woman I am. And it's nope, then you've lost the true nature of understanding and respecting violence.
My late teacher, Bob Orlando, he used to say, a warrior can choose pacifism, others are condemned to it. And I think that always made a lot of sense to me. And what is it? Civis pacem para bellum. If you want to live in peace, prepare for war. It's kind of the history of mankind. And a lot of people 2 years ago got a rude awakening after the George Floyd incident happened. And then you basically had the US for 3 months straight with riots and looting and plundering and cities burned to the ground. If I'm not mistaken, Minneapolis alone, the insurance claims was for $2 billion. That's only the claims, not the true damage. That's one city. And there was massive violence from people just sitting there having a drink. All of a sudden, got this just bunch of people coming in, and from struggle sessions to actual violence, to people just getting killed, getting shot, getting stuck in a burning building, and all that. And I always say to people, like, it's very easy to create that environment. Just shut off electricity, water, food for 3, 4 days, and you're going to see violence.
Well, look
That's
what
what happens.
happened when people thought that there was going to be a toilet paper shortage. There wasn't going to be stuff to wipe their butt.
Yep.
They lost their mind.
Yep.
And it's, now it's here in the United States, I feel like people are realizing their fragility and their dependence on, well, somebody else will, the food just magically shows up on the grocery store shelves. Baby formula magically shows up on shelves. I mean, I saw a headline yesterday where movie theaters are concerned about a popcorn shortage. And my kids were laughing. They were like, what? And I thought it was a joke. I thought it was satire. And it's like, no, and then people, it's like the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah.
Do you know Boris with True North Tradecraft at all?
Who?
Boris, he's from Canada, True North Tradecraft.
No.
He wrote a great little book, not to plug someone else's book, but he wrote a little book on disaster preparedness. And it's an easy read. It's quick. He breaks it down. It's very easy to implement his advice. It's very easy to read, and I love it. And he said, if the transportation supply chain shuts down, this is how many hours until mass chaos.
Yep.
This is how many hours until complete mayhem. And I don't think people realize that it's not weeks, it's days. And I'm not saying this to scare people. People are going to listen to this woman. They're going to be like, why did you bring her on? She's scary.
No, my audience has heard me rant about this before.
Okay, good. So this isn't too crazy out of the way, but it's things like that, hey, I'm not saying that I'm perfect. I'm not saying like, hey, we've got chickens and pigs and cows. We're on a farm. We're self-sufficient at all. But there's little things that my husband and I are very intentional about in preparing. And yes, you can do all the food prep and you can have all the supplies and you can have the generators and whatever. But guess what? If then people know that you're the one that has all those supplies and you can't defend yourself or your family by using violence to keep yourself safe, your family safe, it's not going to do any good. And I don't want to go too far on a tangent and go off on that.
No,
but it's a reality that I think people who get scared of studying violence or intimidated by people who seem comfortable with studying and respecting violence, I want to sit down with those people and have the conversation. And it seems counterintuitive to my book, which is very like, hey, this is how those micro threats, if you think someone's following you, if you think you have, persistence isn't romantic, it's stalking. We got to start with those foundational skills, because if I would go into a class of mine and start talking about, here's where you need to stab someone if they're attacking you to save your life, everybody in my class, my target demographic, my consumer, the everyday woman is going to go, I'm out. Kind of like your point you made the comment, there was a woman who came into your class and you realized, here's how you did. And they're like, I'm out. We have to start giving them the tools to build to get there. There's a reason why we start schooling at a young age and we build up the skills.
Yep. I mean, just to touch on the point that we talked about chaos and so on. When my kids were 18, I took them out for a day. I've written about. I'll share the link in the blog about that blog post in the description. Basically, it's that, look, you're 18. That's legal age here. That means that they can take off, and there's nothing I can do to stop them. They can sign contracts. They can go and say, "Dad, never want to see you again." So I always wanted to do something like a rite of passage. I think this is something that has been lost in many societies, in modern societies, and I think it's actually quite important. So I took them out for like half a day. We went to a bunch of places from their past, and I talked about a lot of stuff about the reason I divorced their mom and a lot of stuff. And one of the things I showed them was the Port of Antwerp, which I'm not mistaken, the Port of Antwerp is the third biggest in the world, maybe fourth. It's pretty important for Europe. I've actually taught classes there in a lot of the companies there. So It's a city upon itself. I think it was 26,000 employees go there every day, or maybe 30,000. Not quite sure anymore. And it's just industry. That's all it is. And I said, look, okay, now we enter the port of Antwerp, that zone. And we drove for like 5-10 minutes. And I said, just look what everything that's here. Now look, take your phone, put on the GPS, look where you are, and then zoom out on Google Maps, see how far we've driven, not far, and how much freaking bigger this place is. Right. So what have you seen? You've got, petrochemicals, you've got this, you've got that, you've got a nuclear plant on the other side of the river. Right. So whatever you think needs to change in society on a fundamental level, you need to replace all this stuff first. Because if this goes, everything you see here around you goes. The car, the plastics, your phone, your clothes, it's all gone. It's going to have to be done. Either it's impossible or it needs to be done like they did a few centuries ago. So whatever you think about how the world works, food, like magic, it's in the stores. No, there's a lot of stuff that needs to happen before, your hamburger is lying in the store. If you think you can change the world, that's fine. I'm not saying you can't, but fix that stuff first. And this is how the world works. And if this breaks down, a lot of stuff breaks down, and then we get violence.
Yeah.
It's always been like this.
Effect.
Yeah. We are straight barreling down at high speeds into a recession. Like the parameters that I've seen looks like 1930s and worse. Will it go that far? We don't know, but it's pretty bad. It's getting pretty bad. Just heard that official inflation in Belgium is 9%. It's actually much higher, but that's the official number. So what happens in those societies? Violence becomes more prevalent because people get more desperate. And if you have no understanding of how violence works, because like we said, safe world nowadays mostly, so you don't need that skill, all of a sudden these skills get relevant. Just to give you an example, so Ukraine is pretty far from here, but a lot of Ukrainians fled for the war. A bunch of them, tens of thousands, arrived in my country. These people need help. They're in a really bad spot. Well, a few days ago, neighbors said that, the folks at down the street that tend to put their wash out to dry on the sidewalk because they've got no space, they've got no garden, nothing on the inside the house. A van with Ukrainian license plates rolled up, opened the side panel, grabbed all the clothes, the rack and everything, closed it, and drove off. And I said, look, these are likely desperate people. Yeah. And they made it out alive, and they ended up over here, and that's what happened. Now, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying, like, this happens when people are desperate. And that's one example. So what would happen if one of the folks living there was just coming outside and they don't let go? How desperate are they? You don't know. You don't know. This is how quick violence can go for very, very valid reasons. You've got nothing and you want to survive. Or scarcity happens and you're scared, like baby formula. There were people I haven't seen fights in the US over this, but I have seen, shouting matches in supermarkets over somebody just grabbing all the baby formula in her cart. And people said, like, leave something for us, we've got a baby too. It's like, screw you, my baby comes first. And it's just this whole thing of that no violence can't happen anymore. So why would I learn about it? And the undertone is it's scary and it's a little bit wrong. I don't really want to know anything about it. I was ranting.
No, that's okay. I'm like, we're going off. I figured that the two of us could have quite an interesting conversation. To that, I'll caveat, maybe this will help kind of swing us back around. But so often women will say that, well, I could never be violent. I could never imagine injuring someone, much less killing them. And then I say, okay, what if they were going after your kids? And instantly, mama bear, oh, you don't touch a hair on the head of my kids. I would do anything for my kids. And so it's a really, it's a thing that I like to bring out to the forefront and say, so you would do that for your kids. Me too. I'm not saying that that's not right, but why do you not have that same warrior mentality for your own life? Like your kids need you. Your kids need you to be here and to be there for them. And there was a book I read, and I swear, and this is why I don't quote the book or quote this necessarily, because I'm like, I read a lot. So sometimes I wonder, where did I hear that? But that and somebody much smarter would have this answer, is that there's a different neural pathway for the mama bear. Like it literally lights up a different area of our brain when we feel like our loved ones are in danger versus ourselves. And that was mind-boggling to me. That was really fascinating. And one thing with women is we hear it over and over again. Like, I just don't think I could hurt another human. I don't think I could injure someone, kill them. And then you layer on, like you were talking about layers, and you layer on, it's their domestic partner. It's what someone they thought was a friend. It's someone in the social circle. It's someone at work. And they're just, I could never hurt someone that I know. And how do we combat that? I don't have the exact answer, but I think the conversations that I was trying to bring out in my group or in my book is we need to talk about that reality. It's really easy as instructors, especially in self-defense, to slip into the stranger danger, to slip into stranger attacks, because it takes out emotions. It takes out financial abuse. It takes out emotional abuse, verbal abuse, gaslighting. And those are really the hard things to talk about. And again, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychotherapist, but I'm a woman, and I've been dealing with these kind of micro threats my entire life. So while I don't have the answer, I'm also going to stand up and say, this isn't okay. I don't have the answers, but I'm going to talk about it and bring it out into the open, because there's lots of people who don't know that they can say it out loud, because they don't, again, they're thinking about repercussions, but their life matters. Their voice matters. They're taking up space on the planet matters. So we have to have these conversations.
You touched upon this, in my opinion, in the book very well when you talked about boundaries, and you wrote, you have people in your life now that may not be as close to you in the future. I think for especially women, this is a very important message to hear, because a lot of the times, you know, like you just said, it's a family member, a friend, and so on that you end up having trouble with, is that the assumption is, well, this person is in my life, he's going to stay there. Well, actually, sometimes it's a good thing to get rid of somebody, get them out of your life.
And we're not saying kill them and throw them in the river,
yes,
people.
I was
We're
getting
just
there
saying
almost.
not letting them in your life.
Nowadays, you got to be careful that sometimes you have to excommunicate somebody. It's like, you are no longer part of my circle. And it can be hard to do, especially if it's emotional.
Well, you've invested time.
Yeah.
You have years, you have memories, you've shared things in the past. And are you the same person you were 10 years ago? I know I'm not. And so I don't fault others. I don't look at it as like a failure that maybe I don't have the same goals anymore, or I don't have the same interests. Okay, we're two people. We were together for a certain amount of time. I respect you as a friend, but that's kind of talking about that mental, emotional boundary side of things. Is this is no longer serving, and I'm actually not respecting my own boundaries with making my mental health a priority, making my emotional health a priority anymore. And so why wait until it's toxic? You know, it's okay to say goodbye to relationships, and you don't even have to be formal about it. You know, there's times where there's friends that, gosh, I haven't talked to them for years. I don't wish them ill, but our paths just went separate ways. And if I see them in a public setting or cross paths again, great. Hi, how are you doing? But I don't have guilt that I haven't called them. I haven't texted them.
Yeah.
It's recognizing that even good relationships come to an end sometimes naturally. Yeah. And so if there's toxicity, or if it's negatively impacting you, that's also okay to not continue to have that person in your life.
Yeah. And sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes it's not cut and dried, like you can't just cut them loose and go on your merry way. For instance, I know of a couple, they've been together for a very long time. But when they were just starting dating, his best friend hit on her, and he knew they were dating. And her husband's like, he still doesn't really want to believe, I think, that it actually happened, but she's adamant. She's like, no, he was hitting on me. Well, to this day, I really doubt that she will ever be alone with him in any context at all with that guy. That she will allow herself to be in a situation where he could, make whatever remarks or worse, whatever, because of what happened. So he's been virtually excommunicated, even though the friendship with the husband is still alive. They don't see each other as much anymore. But the point is that you don't necessarily have to go like 0 or 100%. You can be like, okay, this guy's an asshole. He's very disrespectful to my husband, my boyfriend, whatever, because he hit on me and he knows that I'm with this guy. That's not a good friend. I tried to explain to my partner, he's not getting it or doesn't want to see, fine. But I'm going to protect my boundary. He doesn't get to spend time alone with me. There's no way I'm stepping into a car with this guy alone, and so on. So you don't have to go berserk and basically, the whole John Wick thing, excommunicado, and all the hits go out to all the hitmen and so on. So you don't have to do that. Boundaries can be, a little bit flexible. Like there might be a workaround.
Well, I say that the boundaries can be elastic.
Yeah.
That they can stretch and mold, because even to my point earlier, depending on my mood or maybe stuff that I'm going through, my boundaries might look different. Like, yes, I love you, friend, but mentally, like I'm having a tough day and I just need some time alone, so understanding that can change. And then that's completely normal and that's okay. A good point you brought up is perspective. Somebody's behaviors to a specific individual. And so I will use the couple that you just mentioned as an example. And I don't know any of the history. I don't know. So I'm completely making this up. This is completely hypothetical, people. But for her, he displayed a behavior that made her uncomfortable. Okay. She acknowledged it. She communicated whatever. And now she set her boundaries. I don't want to be alone with him, whatever. Well, because she said that he hit on her. Well, he's not going to hit on her husband necessarily. So of course he's not seen that behavior. Of course he's never been put in a position where the friend made the husband uncomfortable. So it's also mutually respecting someone else's boundaries and recognizing that behaviors that make one person feel uncomfortable, it doesn't invalidate them because you've never seen them or because you've never experienced those behaviors from that individual. And narcissists and manipulators tend to be very good at making everyone else think they're the nicest people, salt of the earth, good humans, because that's part of the manipulation. That's part of the gaslighting. They're trying to isolate. They're trying to feel like they're crazy, or maybe I'm reading too much into it, or, and then when I tell my story to someone, they don't believe me because, that's really, I can't believe that they're the nicest person ever. Well, no, if you're not the target of the behaviors, you're not going to see it. Yeah. And so again, having those conversations, not saying that that's the situation your friends were in, but it's that recognizing, hey, society, just because you think that the person X is just super awesome and they're great to you and they're a good friend to you, doesn't mean that person shows up that same way to the other person or other people in their lives. And recognizing that. And that's where too, there's times where it's like, you know what? My husband has friends where I'm like, yeah, no, I don't really care for them. But I get that they're not going to act the way they act around me to you. So if you want to hang out with them, like I'm going to be a little bit leery, and I'm going to like tell you, hey, watch for this so that you're aware. But you can go out and hang out with them, because guaranteed with you, they're going to be just fine. You're not a female. So, and that's tough, because then people say, well, what about bystander? And you need to call that behavior out. And it's like, okay, but if my husband's never seen the behavior, then what is he calling out? Like, it almost just kind of stirs the pot versus the mature way, the taking the ego out of it of, I just don't want to be around that person. If they cross my boundary,
Yep.
then yes, then I have to decide what's my next step. But sometimes there's a little, it's like, I don't like drama. I don't like gossip. I don't like stirring the pot. So how can I just keep my mental health sane and keep going with life?
And it happens. I mean, it happens in relationships sometimes that there's no really good solution. And if you push it, it ends with conflict. There was one time I was in a relationship with somebody, and her best friend, they both were just getting along great for years and years on end. And her best friend had a boyfriend, and he apparently hated my guts on sight, because it was from the first time we met. Two couples, we came together for drinks and that.
Yep.
He seemed to just not like me at all. I don't know why. I never knew why. I never said anything about it, because it's the boyfriend of her best friend. So what am I going to do? I'm just like, fine. He would just like have these small jabs all the time. And I'm like, okay, fine. Go ahead. I don't need to prove myself to you. If you want to be a dick about it, that's fine. You leave me alone. And you seem to go on your merry way after we separate, and I'm like, haha, I had a good time, annoying that guy, whatever. But one time when we were in a bigger group, he made an extremely rude remark about both me and the lady I was with. The whole conversation stopped. And I looked at him and I didn't say anything. And then conversation picked up again. And when we left, we were back in the car, and I said, look, I never want to see him again. Because next time I see him and he opens his mouth, how light the jab might be, I'm going to punch him in the face, because he went way too far. So you can see your girlfriend as much as you like. She's welcome at our place every day. I don't care, but not him. And she had a talk with her, because her girlfriend actually had seen the dynamic, and she was in agreement that, okay, that was way over the line. And she understood where I was coming from. They're still best friends. The relationship was fine between the two women, but it could have escalated very, very easily. So I defended my boundaries, and I said, like, look, this is not worth a fight for me. But I'm going to put up with more of this nonsense. So how about we just nip it in the bud and say, like, look, you guys, you want to go out together, it's fine, but not the four of us anymore. It's just going to happen. And that worked great. So what I meant to say with that story is that you can be creative. You don't have to view it black or white. It's not necessary.
Well, and so this is what I always say. It's not sexy. It's not the Hollywood storyline. It's not, TVs or movies. And so sometimes people forget that that's an option, to just enforce a boundary and walk away, and then nothing happens. Nothing happens. That's a good thing.
It's a win.
We're used to almost needing the conflict, and then overcoming the conflict and the drama. And it's like, no, we don't have to live that way. And it's hard to break those habits. And it's hard when it's your ego. I know that when I'm having a very visceral, angry response to something or getting defensive, I'm like, ooh, that touched on something in me. That my response is something in me. And so I get curious about myself versus like, how dare that other person? Yes, I will not pretend I'm perfect. And I'm not thinking about mental ways that I want to, inflict either a sharp comment back, or some sort of like trip them when they're not looking, or throw Legos under their bare feet. But, there's just different ways to handle that again, talking about it, I think, brings it out. And then it's like, let's celebrate nothing happening. You walked away, or you went into the store because you thought someone was following you and nothing happened. Awesome. Way to go. It's harder to celebrate those things. We don't sit around talking with friends about the cool thing that never happened.
That is true. I'm just watching time, because I know you have to leave in a little bit. So I'd like to wrap up here and then quickly get to a little bit of a bonus segment for Patreon. Where can people reach you? What kind of websites do you have?
The website is thediamondarrowgroup.com. I can send you the links.
I've got it.
Okay. Following me on Instagram at the Diamond Arrow Group, Facebook, the Diamond Arrow Group. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Kelly Sayre. Send me an email. There's ways to reach out and connect on my website. And definitely check out the book on Amazon. You can buy it for yourself or for a gift for someone else. Sharp Women.
Okay, and I'll put links to all these other socials and the websites and the book and so on in the show notes, which you can find at wimsblog.com, and then / and then the number of this episode. I'm not exactly sure which one that will be when this will air, but go to my blog and you'll find links to everything we discussed here. Well, this was awesome, Kelly.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited. Really, and make sure you become a Patreon member if you're not, because the bonus round is going to be good.
It's going to be good because then we can start swearing.
Yeah. Oh, I swore before.
It was an okay one. Apple is actually quite serious about ratings, about that it's swearing, no swearing, and so on, adult content, blah blah blah. So I try to keep the regular podcast episode relatively clean. Doesn't always work. I had a good friend on, and he was cussing up a storm. And I'm like, okay, now it's R-rated. It's fine. Let's embrace it and keep going.
There you go.
But I've got a bunch of good questions from my patrons, and we'll get to that.
Sounds
Any
good.
parting words for the main episode?
Stay curious, not paranoid, and stay sharp.
All right. Okay. Thanks so much, Kelly.
Thanks.